Less than a year after we were first introduced to the Smart #1 in Singapore, the Smart lineup in Singapore is set to grow again very soon. This time around, this car might appeal to buyers that are on the hunt for something a bit sleeker and perhaps a bit more dynamic. We've flown all the way to sunny Brisbane to check it out, and this is the all-new Smart #3. So, what is a Smart #3? Well, Smart is sort of positioning this as the sportier, sleeker twin as mentioned earlier of the #1, and you really do see that with this kind of coupe SUV roofline that you get at the rear. Imagine if you had a #1 but you kind of like stretched it out and flattened it, you get the #3, and I think the car looks really good actually. In fact, the car is wider, longer as well as lower than #1, so the proportions do speak for themselves. I do like that this sort of maintains the styling that becoming more familiar with the #1. You know, you're not going to mistake this for the #1 even though you know it's related to the #1. And one design feature that I want to point out is that on the #1 you got the Smart logo on the D-pillar. Here it's on the fenders behind the front wheel arches, so still very Smart-like but with its own unique touch. Alright, we're going to be cycling through a few different cars today, so just bear with me. As we come around to the rear, I also want to talk about the #3's practicality. So in keeping with this very clean rear end that we see, you might be asking yourself, where exactly is the boot release button? And the answer is right here, on the A-word. And ta-da! This opens up, electronic tailgate. We get 370 litres worth of boot space at the rear, which is more than what you get on the #1. Space is slightly deeper. It's an okay space for an SUV, I wouldn't say not the best, but still very usable for Singapore's roads. So let's go hop into the rear and check out the rear seats. Come around to the rear bench, and you can see again that we have those frameless windows that we first saw on the #1. And I would say space is honestly quite good here. As mentioned earlier, the #3 actually has a slightly longer wheelbase than on the #1, so you do get a little bit more legroom at the rear, but it's not like the #1 was wanting for space particularly anyway. And of course, because we have this panoramic halo sunroof, as Smart likes to call it, you still feel like that cabin is quite airy and light. And also, interesting thing to note is the fact that we also have the Smart logo kind of stuck imprinted onto the front headrest here, so that's kind of like an added visual treat for passengers at the rear. But otherwise, quite a nice and usable space. Let's hop into the front now. Alright, and again in the front, if you've already been in the #1, this should be quite a familiar looking space. One thing that I still want to comment and point out is the fact that because of the way this central column is raised and kind of connects into the dashboard, you get these very distinct spaces for the front passenger as well as the driver, which is a nice design feature that we have on the Smarts. Otherwise, it's really more or less a similar design. The only difference I would say is that instead of the capsule-shaped air vents that we had on the #1, you get circular shaped ones here on the #3, which are more reminiscent of Mercedes-Benz, which is the one that has designed this car anyway. And we also got a 12.8-inch infotainment screen as well as this slim digital driver's display, so again, very familiar aesthetic. We will have a review of the Smart #1 coming up soon, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about the infotainment system. But again, you can see that the graphics are very nice, and it's exactly what we got on the #1 with these video game inspired like graphics. Alright, so we're behind the wheel of the #3 right now, and in kind of like analysing and investigating the positioning of this car as the sportier twin of the #1, there are a couple of things that do stand out. First of all, in the #1 you kind of feel like you're sitting on the car because of the very elevated driving position, but because this car rides lower, and also you're just seated a bit lower to the ground, you do feel like it's a bit more driver oriented already to begin with. Second thing, even though this car has the same setup as the #1 in terms of the architecture, the motors that it uses produce the same power levels regardless of whether you're going for the single motor or the dual motor Brabus variant. This is actually the faster car across both variants, so 0 to 100 takes just 5.8 seconds in this rear-wheel drive Pro Plus compared to I think 6-ish seconds on the #1. So there are already a couple of things that, you know, are faithful to Smart's claim that this is the sportier twin of the #1. As an electric car, I think the Smart #3 also delivers on all the sorts of joys, I would say, that we are increasingly familiar with in terms of electrification. So the acceleration is very smooth, very linear, the power delivery is instant, and around town, it's honestly very comfortable because the car doesn't really need to like cycle through gears as you're going from light to light. On the expressway, it's very stable at speed. Yeah, very quiet with the exception of a bit of tyre roar. I'd also say the steering feel on the #3 feels just that bit more responsive than on the #1, as you would expect from this more driver-oriented twin. It's still slightly vague, not really communicative in terms of the feedback it gives, but for all intents and purposes, I think it should satisfy more keener drivers already. And again, if this amount of power is not enough for you, there's also the dual motor Brabus variant that has 422 brake horsepower as well as 543 Newton meters of torque. That's the car from 0 to 100 in just 3.8 seconds, which is ridiculous. To be honest, I feel like this amount of power in this Pro Plus single motor variant is already enough for most people in Singapore. So this is definitely the car of choice. And also, because it has one electric motor less, it's rear-wheel driven, I would expect that this feels like the slightly more agile variant between the two. To be clear, despite all these impressive figures, the Hashtag 3 is still not really a proper performance car. Its suspension is still on the softer sprung side of things, for instance, and its steering could use a bit more feedback. In other words, it's not a full-out hot hatch or hot SUV. Still, all things considered, it's still pretty well-rounded. And again, as mentioned earlier, this car, I think it handles well enough, it rides well enough. It strikes that nice sweet spot between comfort and also decent levels of driver engagement, honestly. So this is honestly the variant that I would personally pick, and I think most Singaporean consumers will pick as well. So alright guys, that was a very quick, really very quick first look at the Smart Hashtag 3. In the meantime, what are your thoughts on the Smart Hashtag 3? Let us know in the comments. If you've liked this video, don't forget to hit the like, share and subscribe buttons, as well as follow us on TikTok at Sgcarmart. That's all from us from Brisbane. We'll catch you in the next video. Bye! I don't know how to close this. Sorry.
Mike.
Second leg, we're going to do a right turn.
Trying not to think about food.
That's you.